Everybody ready? Good to see you guys tonight. Now, who was not here on the spot about 4 weeks ago when we did the last part one? Okay, you guys are in trouble. You gotta keep No, I would. You're not going to need that class to understand what's going into this class, but it would behoove you to go back and get as much as you can out of that class. Because what we're talking about tonight, we're talking about the consequences of not doing the stuff that we talked about in part one. And so it's not just that, there's going to be a lot of other things, and that's the content of tonight. That's what I'm about to get into. But it really is like when we talk about cancer, which is really the topic of this evening, it is the consequence of not taking care of yourself. We know from the research that cancer is a lifestyle preventable, lifestyle reversible disease. But so often we wait so long before it's diagnosed that by the time you get it, you're in crisis mode and you're just trying to survive. And that's why a lot of the problems we're going to talk about tonight. Now, for the people that are watching online, I am Dr. Jake. If you've never watched any videos like this before, we're going to spend probably about the next 90 minutes together. I try to keep it about 60, but one, I like to rabbit trail. Two, both Cheryl and I have some new information. And three, there's going to be some questions that come up. And that, of course, is going to add to the rabbit trails. So if you're here in the room, just for the sake of the people online, if you could hold your questions to the end, if you need something to write down, to write those questions so you don't forget them, just raise your hand. We'll get that for you, and we'll get you back to that. But yeah, I started this clinic about 9 years ago. Nine years ago today was the first day that we saw any patients walking through our doors. It was a soft open. We didn't announce it. We just picked out a few people that we thought it would be good to try on. We found a whole bunch of errors in our system and in the building, and that helped us get going. But that first month, we saw over 100 new patients coming through our doors. And now it's just phenomenal. We get to be a holistic, focused, subluxation-based chiropractic clinic where we actually get to help people do things like straighten scoliosis and put curves back in necks, and then help people change and transform their lives. I do that because that's what happened to me. You guys who are patients, you know my story. I was saved by a chiropractor as a baby. Quit breathing at 2 weeks old. Quit breathing every single night for 14 times a night for the next 6 months. And went to all the specialists, in and out of emergency rooms. No doctor could give me a diagnosis other than sudden infant death syndrome, where they were just keeping me alive. And it wasn't until my mom's best friend got me to her chiropractor that he found a massive subluxation at my atlas, pressing up against my brainstem. And he did one adjustment. My mom said I just relaxed and started breathing. And if it wasn't for that chiropractor, I wouldn't be here today. And so, if not for that, you guys wouldn't be here today either. So let's jump into this. So here's where we left off. Last week, we talked about how 70 million Americans have gut disorders. But what happens if, one, you don't realize you have a gut disorder? Because a lot of these things, they don't become symptomatic until you've had them for years and years and years. You just stop going quite as much, or maybe the texture of your stool changes a little bit, or maybe you misdiagnose it as a skin disorder or an anxiety or a depression disorder, and you never actually address the root cause in your gut. Well, I had a friend of mine who went through franchise training with me in Naples, Florida, and he had really bad IBS. And he said that when he got IBS, initially it was just a little bit of diarrhea, and everybody's had a little bit of diarrhea. I mean, you get a bad bug or you get a bad food and it just runs through you. But he was getting it, started off a couple times a week, then it went to once a day, then it went to a couple times a day. And so he started going to his doctor, and the doctor, of course, what did he do? You guys tell me. You know exactly what happens when you go to the doctor with any symptom. Medicated, they tried to lock him up. And Cheryl probably knows the exact medication. Imodium, try to stuff that in there, keep it from coming out so much. And he was living off of the Imodium for long enough that eventually they sent him to a gastroenterologist. And the GI doctor said, you know, you don't just have IBS, this is actually starting to turn into Crohn's disease. And this is what happens. If you have IBS long enough, it turns into an autoimmune condition like Crohn's like ulcerative colitis. It's just the next step down the trail. What happens if you have Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis or one of these autoimmune conditions sitting in your gut? Well, it increases your likelihood of it turning into cancer. Or let's just say instead of one of those autoimmune conditions, just start growing polyps in your digestive system because all that inflammation in there, all that leaky gut, all that dysbiosis, it builds up inside there. Where are those polyps going to turn into? Why do they go in there and they sniff them out if they find them? Cancer. And that's really where this is going to go. So when we look at the stats, and those of you that have been in this week have seen this, but 1 out of every 2 men and 1 out of 3 women will be diagnosed with some form of cancer in their lifetime. So look to your right, look to your left. Yeah, that's one of you, regardless of which gender you are. That's one of you, and that's everybody in the room. So you look at the overall stats, the United States is not the worst in cancer. We are the 4th worst in cancer. We have one of the highest mortality rates of cancer in the world. Australia is the worst. And it's a bunch of white people living in a very tropical climate. I can imagine why. You know, and the United States is really very similar as well. Most of us are of Caucasian descent, with a couple of exceptions there. But when you move from one climate to another, especially when you go from Northern Europe down to where we're at in the United States, or even further south, that just increases risk of skin cancer. So the further away from your genetic heritage, the more likely that is to change. But there's also things that happen in the gut with that. So we're going to get into some of the most common causes. So first thing I wanted to do for you guys is I wanted to break down the differences between a healthy cell and a cancer cell. And you guys can start to peel back the layers on what's actually contributing to and causing cancer. So number one, a healthy cell uses oxygen for fuel, and not just for fuel, but it also uses it to catalyze breaking down fuel. And so when you're using fuel, you get about 36 or 38 ATP out of 1 small. And so it's actually a really efficient way to produce energy. A healthy cell will also use ketones for energy, and that can give you 22 ATP out of 1 glucose. And also, it doesn't need sugar for fuel. It can use these things called ketones, which if you eat a lot of fat or you eat a lot of protein, your body will convert those into glucose or ketone. So glucose, that would be from protein, and ketones, that would be from fats. 3, it thrives with or without inflammation. A healthy cell will adapt to its environment. It will do whatever it needs to do in order to stay alive. And so you see that with or without inflammation, it's going to do right. Number 4, it does require proper nerve supply, because when you cut off cells from their nerve supply, what happens to the cell? It does, so it needs that nerve supply to stay alive. And then 5 has a slightly elevated 7.5, 7.3 to 7.5.
7.35 to 7.45.
There you go, exactly. I hit the range, just not the exact. All right, so let's look at the cancer cell. What are your guesses as to what is different on here?
Everything.
Yeah, exactly. So number 1, it doesn't use oxygen for fuel at all. In fact, because it goes out and it uses oxygen, it converts glucose, 1 glucose into 2 ATP, which is very much less efficient than a healthy cell would. And so it is burning energy constantly. Number 2, it uses sugar for fuel almost exclusively. They love sugar. In fact, this is why if you have cancer of any kind, they'll send you in for a PET scan, which is just radioactive sugar that they put inside you, and they track where it goes, and it lights up wherever the cancer is, because cancer will pull it in. It's almost like a straw, it sucks it right up. That's how efficient or how much it wants it. It has an inflammatory environment. You won't find cancer in a non-inflamed environment. It is always inflamed. Number 4, it doesn't need proper nerve supply. In fact, what we found in research, this is when I was in school, so I was learning about cancer, and then I learned brand new research project. If you cut the nerves going to a cancer cell, cancer explodes. The growth just goes astronomical. And so the less nerve supply a cancer cell has, the larger it gets. And in fact, they did this research study with the vagus nerve, and they initially did it with autoimmune conditions. And they were finding that if they put an electromagnet in the vagus nerve and they ran a magnet over top of it, generating electricity in the vagus nerve, that would start to reverse autoimmune conditions. And so it's actually a therapy that you can have done if you have an autoimmune condition. But they did the same thing for patients with cancer, and they found it actually started to shrink the cancer cells just by stimulating the vagus nerve. So really cool stuff. Number 5 has a highly acidic or highly alkaline, actually even slightly acidic. What we find is most cancers are below 6, but some are up at 10 or 11 on the alkaline or the pH scale, showing that it's highly alkaline. And so you can kind of see the problem. See, you can kind of see how we develop cancer as Americans. And so, these symptoms, these are early warning signs of gut dysfunction. This doesn't mean cancer yet. It does not mean cancer. But these are signs that the gut's malfunction. We covered these last time. But really, when we're talking about cancer, we're talking about the end game of a long-term process. For you to get a symptom of cancer itself, it has to be inside your system for 20 years. And so we want to get there early. So we want to address inflammation. Here are the 5 daily habits that you may be doing or not, hopefully not, that are contributing to building cancer in your body. Number 1, you eat the standard American diet. I don't know, I look at that, that looks pretty good. All right? And so what are the major characteristics of the standard American diet? Fat and salt, and don't forget this pile, sugar, fat, salt, and sugar. I wouldn't blame salt so much. With anything, and even the fat as well, and the sugar, you can have all of them in healthy amounts. You can have all of them in healthy sources. But what are most of our fats made of? Rancid seed oils, mainly, right? Highly processed, highly heated, chemically processed fats. If you look at, vegetable oils, vegetables themselves are healthy. Oils themselves are healthy, but how much oil is actually in a vegetable? Unless it's an olive or an avocado, not much. Those two things, you can squeeze it and oil drips out. Corn, soy, all these other things that most of us eat, canola, in order to get it out, you have to really process it, really heat it up super high. And with any fat, the higher you heat it, the more it breaks down and becomes inflammatory inside your body. The other thing that we do with the standard American diet is we get our omega-6s and omega-3s out of whack. We have 17 to 34 times more omega-6s than omega-3s, but it should be really 1 to 1 to 2. And so we're eating a really inflamed diet just from a fat perspective. Sugar, well, one of these back in about 1900 used to be 2 years worth of annual consumption. And now we consume that whole pile in a year. 350 pounds on it. Now, if you've done the healthy thing, you've cut out sodas and sugary beverages, you don't drink your sugar, well, take off about 100 pounds of that. You're still consuming about 250 to 260 pounds a year. It's added to just about every processed food. You go to a restaurant, they sprinkle it in your meat, they sprinkle it in your pasta sauce. It makes you want more. And so anybody that's making it for you and selling it to you is going to add it, which is why one of the healthiest things you can do for your diet is just make all your food from scratch yourself. Really. I mean, if you look at any study on any diet, it will outperform the standard American diet just on that fact alone. So we have to make sure that we're eating the healthy stuff there. And then as far as salt is concerned, salt is actually really good. There was a study done on salt just recently that showed that when you go from a low salt to a high salt diet, initially you'll see a spike in blood pressure. But as you get used to having a higher salt diet, your blood pressure actually returns to normal and then drops lower. And so what do we want to do with salt? Not just take in high amounts of salt in everything, right? Processed foods are one of the ones that have the highest amounts of salt because salt makes it taste good again. Also makes us want to crave more salty sweet combo, especially salty fat sweet, even more. But if you get the processed salt, then you're lacking a lot of the trace minerals that salt is in the ground with. Whereas if you get a Himalayan or a pink salt or a sea salt, that has a lot of more of those trace minerals. So we want to look at those things. Daily habit number 2. Anybody familiar with this word? Are you in that word, best friends? If you're best friends with that word, we need to stop that. We need to cut that out. But yeah, Americans deal with more stress than ever before. And honestly, most of it has to do with this And that guy that she's holding back there, everybody turn around and look at. Yeah, no, the cell phones, the smartphones, they keep us on a leash. It's like carrying around a ball and chain all the time, except that ball and chain might electrocute you at any time, or just vibrate in your pocket and tell you, hey, come over here. I want your attention. I need to take care of you now. And so Americans are dealing with stress chronically. We're not sleeping enough. We're supposed to be getting 7 to 9 hours. Get like closer to 6 to 8. And so it's really causing us to struggle. It's also causing more stress hormones to be released. And when stress hormones are released, it actually increases your blood sugar. Your body actually makes that sugar out of your own fat cells, out of your own protein cells, and it will increase your blood sugar in your body. And because you have cortisol, it makes you crave more sugar. It shuts down your digestive system. And so we want to make sure that we're addressing that stress as well. Sedentary lifestyle. Guess what percentage of Americans actually get the recommended amount of exercise in a given week? Not zero. It's not zero. There are some fitness junkies out there. It's about 7%. 7% of Americans get the recommended level of fitness every single day. And so, really when you look at it, our bodies were designed to work. They're designed to move. And when you sit for 6 to 8 hours a day, it's just not going to happen. And so as you do that, you actually decrease your body's ability to get oxygen into all the extremities, into all the cells, organs, and tissues. And so what grows when there isn't oxygen? Cancer cells. Yeah, it's really incredible. Just the things that we do on a daily basis, the way that we live our life, the way that we work, the way that we do recreation. Toxic exposure. I've done a whole class just on toxic exposure, so I won't go too deep here. But does anybody remember how many pounds of chemicals we're exposed to, or how much microplastic we ingest? It's hundreds of tons of pesticides that we consume on a daily basis, and it's about a credit card's worth of plastic, microplastics, every 2 weeks. Yeah, anybody chew the credit card, just for lunch? You do, because everything that you're eating is wrapped in plastic, styrofoam. Even an aluminum can. If you were to melt away all the aluminum, what's left? Plastic lining on the inside. And those microplastics get in our system, and our body tries to filter them out. But because it's a petroleum product, our digestive system is just not as familiar with it. I mean, generationally, our body's used to dealing with even dirt coming through our digestive system, but we wouldn't drink petroleum products. And so just in the last 80 to 100 years, we've had to start to deal with petroleum products in our system, and this is where we're seeing a lot of it. Lack of sleep, big one. I mentioned this back in the stress side of things. But yeah, with the lack of sleep that we deal with, it absolutely increases our inflammation rates, it decreases our brain function, decreases our digestive system. And so that's really important. Now, what do we do when we get cancer? Now, first thing, our whole healthcare system is focused on early detection. And early detection typically arrives somewhere about 8 years after you develop cancer. The best tests, it takes cancer growing about 8 years before it's even detected. Every single one of us right now has some form of cancer in our body. Our white blood cells are killing it, destroying it. But occasionally, if we're doing all those other things, it'll start to go rogue and grow out of whack. Or our immune system gets suppressed and it grows a little bit more and it's not able to take care of it. And so that's where the standard American medical model comes in, and they're firefighters, right? They see a house on fire and they come in with their hoses and their axes and they chop everything down. They'll cut, poison, and burn. Those are the 3 treatments for cancer. Cut, surgery, right? You find a tumor, you want to cut it out. And yeah, you do need to get cancer out of there. Poison, chemotherapy. Burn, you're going to poison that right out, and it'll kill all the fast-growing cells in your body. Third, the burn, radiation, right? Targeted radiation. You'll get down to the smallest cell. You can get a laser focus of that radiation in there. And then we measure our success with these in 5-year intervals. So on these success rates, and there's a lot of different ones out there. So let's say lung cancer. Cancer is one of the worst ones. 5% survival rate. That's not 5 years. That's not 5% survival rate 20 years from now, that's a 5% survival rate, 5 years. In fact, all the cancers, and there's some that are really good, some that are really bad. For a 20-year survival rate, it's only 18%. So if you're diagnosed with testicular cancer in your 20s, which some of you ladies never have to worry about that, but that was one of the things that we looked at in school, because most of us young chiropractors were going through school in our 20s. We're like, okay, this is something we need to be screened for. But a 20-year survival rate of 18% is not something that's very good. Granted, it's usually much higher, testicular cancer, but they don't measure it in 20-year survival rates. They measure it in 5-year survival rates. And so when they're looking at these medications, they actually aren't incentivized to make you survive any longer than 5 years. Everything is focused in that 5-year window, because that's what moves the needle, to move the money, to give them more research. So they can drive it there. And so it's a broken system. When most of the money that goes to some of these pink events that are out there goes to advertising or CEO budget and not to actual cancer research, or even better, because cancer research, all we need to know is that it is preventable. And if we change our lifestyle, we can actually fix it. That's where the real treatment is. Prevention is our best treatment. So the Journal of Pharmaceutical Research, so the drug companies, right? They fund this journal. They did a study about 5 years ago that looked at all the different causes of cancer. And when it came down to it, they said 90+% of cancer is lifestyle preventable. It all has to do with how we're living. And so the NFL, they came up with a crucial catch campaign, and you may have seen this if you watch pro football, but they actually had a website that you could go to that would pop up on the commercials. Crucialcatch.com. You could go in, you could type in all these lifestyle factors. They would tell you your cancer risk, the things that you should change. But guess what? They didn't make enough money off of that, because there is no money in prevention. There's no money in you being healthy. And so when you look at some of the problems with our healthcare system, why we have one of the worst healthcare systems in the world, worst amongst all industrialized nations, is that there's no money in prevention. It's all incentivized on you being sick with the disease process that they can treat. That's it. And so we have to, as our own individuals, as good stewards of this temple that God's given us, we have to be the ones that take responsibility for our bodies. So here are the 5 keys to building an unbreakable immune system that fights and prevents cancer. Number 1, focus on cancer-fighting nutrients. Anybody ever hear eat the rainbow? Yeah, absolutely. You should be getting full colors. Polyphenols, antioxidants, these are super important for your diet. Yes, you want to eat like the advanced one. You want to fix the fats. You want to get those omega-3s, right? You want to get the natural source of healthy healing fats to build up every cell in your body. You want to curb the carbs. You want to get back down to this being your annual consumption of sugar, as opposed to that pile there, right? We have to cut that out, cut that down. And I'm one of the worst offenders there. We have to make sure that we're getting proteins the way that they were designed to be raised. And most of our proteins come from animal products. I love burger just as much as anybody. You have to get that from a grass-fed, pasture-raised, regenerative, ideally, so they're getting nutrients from the ground that God intended to be there, as opposed to ground that's been denatured of all of its trace minerals and nutrients. And then we also have to look at the pesticide in the food. We have to make sure that that's not getting in there either. So get those cancer-fighting nutrients. Number 2, detoxify your home and body. It's not just what we eat. It's not just the pesticides there. It's what we breathe. It's what we put on our skin, and so what we absorb through our water in our showers. The chlorine, the petrochemicals that are in our nonstick pans, the cleaning products that we use. I saw a study just last week, actually, and it was talking about how women who clean the house once a week have lungs that are just as bad as a smoker's. Why would that be? I wonder. The toxins from the chemicals that they're breathing in. Now, I'm not telling you to go be a slob. That's awful for your brain. But if you use good cleaning products, or let's just say you use vinegar and baking soda and water, you think those women that use those have the same toxic lungs as the women who are using bleach and Clorox and all, what's the big one that kills all the germs? Lysol, all these different things. I'm going blank on brands. But yeah, we have to detoxify. Number one thing that we have to do is we have to stop or limit our exposures as much as possible, as much as we can control. And so getting those things out there. De-stress and rest. We have to make a commitment not to focus on stress and getting rid of it, more on creating peace. And really in our bedrooms is the main place to do this. We have to make sure that our bedrooms are a place of peace. We have to identify the things that cause us stress, keep those out of the bedroom, and then create habits within the bedroom that allow us to sleep those 7 to 9 hours. The emphasis more on the 9. I know for a lot of us that's like, oh my goodness, 9 hours, that's like 5 more hours of sleep than I actually get. We have to do that in our beds. We have to do that in a place that doesn't have even light pollution. Light pollution actually disrupts sleep as if you're not even sleeping. Not saying it has no benefit, but it cuts the benefit dramatically. So make sure that you're getting those lights out, you're getting the sounds out, and you're actually creating peace and rest. Movement, mental health, and the immune system. Movement is life. You talk about getting oxygen, you talk about getting nerve supply to these cells. It happens through movement. Mental health is really important here too, but guess what? When you exercise, if you're fighting depression, that exercise will be better for you than the antidepressant meds that your doctor could recommend. So we want to make sure that we are moving as much as possible. The immune system also requires movement. If you just sit on your couch all day, popping vitamin D3 and vitamin C and zinc and all these immune boosting supplements, that's not going to do as much for you as if you get outside and you move around and get fresh air, because that's what moves all the nutrients into the cells. And so we got to get up, we got to move. That'll get our immune system focusing. And then our fuse box. So if the lights went out right now, should we go and change all the light bulbs? No. What's the first thing that we should check if the lights all go? The fuse box. Likewise, if my heart starts malfunctioning just out of the blue, is that more likely to be a control problem or an organ problem when that heart has consistently showed us good function for its entire life? Way more likely to be a control problem, especially when you talk about how things malfunction. So your spine is really the fuse box of your entire nervous system. Brain has to communicate with every organ, cell, and tissue. Health, right? And so if any of these vertebrae in here, they're supposed to be surrounding and protecting the spinal cord, the brain stem, and the nerve roots as they exit out of the spine. If that gets out of alignment even 2 millimeters or 2 degrees and is left there for 5 minutes or more, that decreases the signal running through there by 60%. And so if that's this nerve here that goes to the heart, wouldn't it make sense that if you're getting arrhythmia or a palpitation, that maybe you should check the spine and nervous system as it exits there? That's so much easier to disrupt at this level than it is at this level. In fact, they did a study that measured the compared and contrast, even just pinching nerves. They ran electricity through a dead person's sciatic nerve, and they found that pushing on the nerve root by itself could create sciatica. But pushing on the nerve couldn't create sciatica. But pushing on 2 parts of it could create sciatica. And so literally, think about it, that's double the amount of pressure in 2 different spots in order to create a sciatica-like symptom. And so, yeah, you can get sciatica from piriformis syndrome, but you're far more likely to get it because you have subluxation in your spine. And so when you're looking at that, you have to look at, what is the root cause. Now, does anybody know this little guy? This is my youngest. This is baby Zeke. Yeah, or was my youngest. He's not that little anymore. So this was him back about August of 2020. He was my COVID baby. Born in March 2020. But August 27th, 2020, I got the phone call that they said, Mr. Tucker, your son, Zeke, stopped breathing during his episode. I could do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And when we got him awake, he was having a seizure. So the paramedics are taking him to St. Elizabeth's emergency, pediatric emergency. So what did I do? I left. It was 9:59. Probably a half dozen of you were in here doing your warm-ups and exercises and in my exam room and everything. I said, reschedule, guys. I got to go to the hospital. And I left and I went over there. And when I got there, he wasn't hooked up to anything yet. The nurses had just laid him in bed. And I went over to him and he was struggling. He was gasping for air and he was having a seizure. Hadn't stopped yet. And so I went to him and I felt his little spine just out of instinct. Mm-hmm. And his atlas was so far off to the side, it was pressing up against his brainstem. And so as a chiropractor, what do? You push it back in place. And as I did that, his body relaxed. He started breathing normal and the seizure stopped. He asked for his mom, and then we spent $27,000 trying to figure out what happened. Because I'm a doctor of cause, I want to know. And the hospital has the tests. It has the things to look at for identifying cause. Unfortunately, the doctors that have all these tools don't have the mindset or the drive or the intuition to go and look for root cause. They're looking for diagnosis. But because he wasn't symptomatic after that adjustment, he didn't get a diagnosis. He got an all clear after about a week of sitting at, he was transferred over to Children's in Omaha. But I kept having to adjust him multiple times a day as if he had had a car accident. I've been adjusting this kid about once a week, once every other week for his entire life. Never felt much more than just the smallest subluxation and pushed him back into place before he became symptomatic. And yet I was having to adjust him 3 times a day, and the medical system couldn't find anything wrong with his spine. And what we figured out is his big sister, who was 2 at the time, she didn't want to wear pants that morning. And so she was laying on the bed trying to kick the pants off. My wife was wrestling him back on her, and baby Zeke was laying at the foot of the bed. And my wife only remembers that while Annika was kicking, Zeke got pushed. She didn't see the kick. She just saw that he almost rolled off the bed, and so she pulled him back. And he didn't let out a squawk. He didn't let out a squeal. He didn't stop breathing in that moment, but it had damaged the ligaments enough that when he went down for his nap and he rolled himself over in his sleep, it triggered that atlas just sliding out of place because the ligaments were no longer stable enough to hold. And that's so many spines that I see when I take an evaluation. I just did a consult this morning with a patient who's practically can't walk. And her MRI is so bad, and it came out of nowhere. She'd been good for years and years and years and years. She's in her 70s. And then out of nowhere, she can hardly walk. And it hurts, and they can't do anything for her. And they took an MRI, and they're like, oh yeah, you've got massively bulging and herniated discs in your lumbar spine. They identified L4 and L5 off of the MRI. I saw the same MRI. I said, no, you have L1, L2, L3, L4, and L5. They missed 3 of them. They only identified the biggest 2 because obvious, smack you in the face with them. And I started working on them. And we've been working on them for 3 months. And yeah, she's still using a walker, but she's doing so much better because we got her spine going and got that nervous system fired. So yeah, the nervous system controls everything. We want it to go in function. Subluxation can be as small as this much. All it takes is the vertebra sticking and not moving properly for it to affect the range function overall. And so a chiropractor's job is, 1, identify the subluxation. How do we do that? We do that through 3 basic tests: posture, range of motion, and palpation. We feel the spine, we see how it moves, and we see how you stand in relationship to that. If any of those things are off, we know that something's stuck, something's abnormal, something in your neurology isn't functioning properly. From there, I want to see how the nervous system is functioning. That's where the nerve scan that we do on you guys every 12 visits comes in. We get to see how your nervous system is responding to the stresses in your life. And guess what? Sometimes the stress in your life goes faster than I can keep up with. And so your scans look worse from time, occasionally on those re-exams. And so then I get x-rays and I'm like, okay, is that coming because the stress in your life is so much, or because your spine's getting worse? And that's what the x-ray is needed to do. We can't know how healthy your spine is without the x-ray. We can guess, but would you rather guess or test? I would rather know. I'd rather know the root cause. I'd rather know how healthy and functioning my nervous system is. So that's why we read x-ray. And that's the biggest thing that sets us apart from other chiropractors. There's a lot of things. I know my quirkiness is what brings you guys back. But there's a lot of things, but that's the one main thing, is to continue to take those x-rays over and over and make sure So warning signs, well, if you have a subluxation up top, you think you might get headaches. That's one of the later symptoms that you get. You'll notice that you're actually much more likely to deal with allergies or mucous membrane malfunction. You're getting a lot of postnasal drip, or you get itchy eyes, or your ear starts going off, or your balance isn't quite right. It's much more likely to impact organ function than actually is to get a symptom like pain or headaches. We go down the neck, and of course, if you pinch in on the nerves that go into the muscles of the neck, that can hurt, but you're much more likely to see low thyroid or hyperthyroidism one way or the other because of the malfunction coming from the subluxation. We go down to the upper back, that can impact how your heart beats and how your lungs breathe. It can give you upper back pain. Usually you're going to notice tension in the muscles though before you ever get to pain. That tightness is a sign of subluxation up there. We go down to the mid back, and now we start affecting things like the spleen or the liver, the gallbladder. Gallbladder is really big. We'll see people get those cut out because they're getting a little gallbladder pain, or they get a couple of gallstones. You need that. People do better with their gallbladder than they do without their gallbladder. If you had it taken out, we can work around that, but my goodness, you're setting yourself up for a world of hurt just by getting that removed. And they do that just, when they're in there taking babies out sometimes. It's ridiculous. Pancreas can start malfunctioning, and then we start getting into these ganglions. But yeah, you can get back pain with that, but why wait till it's back pain? That's less than 5% of the nerve, or 40% of that's controlled organ function. We move down to the mid-low back. Of course, you can get a spastic muscle. You're much more likely to get a spastic colon that starts making you go too fast or too slow, coming out the bottom end. You need that to be functioning properly because that's where your microbiome, it says, where 60 to 80% of your immune system resides. And people are much more likely to have a low functioning immune system than they are to have low back pain. Low back pain is the biggest cause of disability in the world. Average case of low back pain costs upwards of $80,000 to deal with medically. But if we take care of it and we prevent it from becoming a problem, then we can do much better. We get down a little lower. Now we're starting to affect hormone production, or reproductive, or bladder. I have so many patients that have L5 go out or sacrum go out, and now they're getting up to pee 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times a night. When really it's not because there's a bladder problem, but because that sacrum or the L5 is out of position. And so we need to work to get that back into place. And how often that comes back into place. So this is one of my favorite quotes. This is from D.J. Palmer. He's considered the developer of chiropractic. He was D.D. Palmer's son. He was there when Harvey Willard was adjusted, and chiropractic was born when his hearing came back. But he said that medicine is the study of disease and what causes man to die. Necessary. We want to know what causes man to die. But chiropractic is the study of health and what causes man to live. And I'd much rather focus on what causes me to live than what causes me to die. It's just the power of life and death. If you focus on life, you get life. If you focus on death, you get death. So I wanted to tell you a little story before I hand it off to Cheryl, and she gets into some more advanced testing that we can use to identify some of these things that are going on. So a lot of you that are patients have heard my dad's story. Back in 2014, my firstborn, Dietrich, and his cousin Elias, were both born within a month of each other. And there was a lot of drama with Elias because he had a similar story to what Zeke had, except it happened in the birthing room. He came out, he scored a 1 out of 10 on the APGAR. He was hardly breathing. I got to go into the emergency room and adjust him and saved his life. He was back normal the next day and home again. Really incredible. But my mom and dad, they live in Michigan, so they wanted to come down and meet their 2 new grandbabies. So they do, and my dad comes down, and you can see he's kind of a big guy here, isn't he? Yeah, 350 pounds, 5'10.5", and he shuffles up to my front door. He's lost all his breath. His face is gone gray. His lips and tongue have lost their color. His ankles are swollen and purple. I think my dad's having a heart attack. And I was like, Dad, are you okay? He's like, no, Jake, great, good to see you. Where's those grandbabies? And we go in the house and we see the grandbabies, and like nothing's different. This is just normal for him. Well, it turns out he wasn't having a heart attack. He was having congestive heart failure. And so I had to intervene with my dad. And we went through those 5 essentials, just like we went through on the presentation. And he was failing every single category. He was working 120-hour work week. He was sleeping 5 hours a night. He had sleep apnea. He was sitting at a computer desk. He was hunching. He was hunched over, putting 20 to 30 extra pounds of stress onto the nerves, controlling his heart every day just by his job, just typing on keyboards and control panels all day for 15, 16-hour days. And then he'd get a 2-minute break, and so he'd grab some food wrapped in plastic from a vending machine, or have something catered in, or the pizza or hot dogs or hamburgers for him to pick up from the lunchroom. And then, his oxygen and exercise supply wasn't very good because his only exercise was what he did from the computer to the lunchroom and back. And then his toxicity, when he was getting a little bit more movement in his life, it was going down to the assembly line floors for Ford, GM, or Daimler Chrysler. And he was helping construct those. And so he's getting all this welding and all these plastics as they're being molded into the shape of our cars that we love to drive. And so he was failing, and his heart was failing, literally congestive heart failure. And so I said, Dad, we got to change everything. And so we did. He's one of my best patients ever. He changed everything. It saved his life. You can see 2016, he lost 70 pounds in 2 years. No signs or symptoms of congestive heart failure, except his blood pressure. And it stayed high, and it stayed high. And what does chronic blood pressure, chronic high blood pressure do? Increases your risk of a stroke. Exactly. And so just this last year, he had a microstroke, had it behind his eye, his vision just got a little, and wound up in the hospital. And so that was a sign to me that, hey, something's not quite right. Something needs to be fixed. And so we dove in and we did some testing. This is where I'm going to hand it off to Cheryl. This is the first test that I knew we needed to do.
Okay. I am using notes, guys, because this is detailed. So again, this is his spotlight test, and you can see that it doesn't say, yeah. Green is low support. He's doing very well up in green. Medium support means he's not doing quite so well. And then that orange, or it's actually red, is high support. And he is definitely in compromised health whenever this dial is in the red or orange. Okay. This is the GI Spotlight test. I think he was our first one that we did this on. We've done probably a handful since then. We just did some consults this afternoon on another patient. But this is a stool specimen. We send you the little box home. It has the directions in it. You collect your own stool specimen. You send it into the company. Takes about 2 weeks from the time they receive it for us to get results back. And this is his, so hang on here. So this one, you can see the Akkermansia is low and his secretory IgA is low. What that basically, in a nutshell, that's telling us he has chronic inflammation. Okay. The Akkermansia helps destroy, is responsible for destroying that gut lining. And then the secretory IgA is an immunoglobulin that resides in the mucus layer of the stomach. And of course, that mucus layer is part of your first line of defense. If we destroy that mucus layer, then that puts us at increased risk for leaky gut. That puts us at increased risk for systemic inflammation. That means head to toe inflammation, food sensitivities, allergies, dysbiosis of the gut. So lots of things, and that's just one of 5 tests. This one, spotlight number 2, you can see here, we've got some highs. The Enterobacter is high. Again, the Akkermansia, these are the same bacteria from the other slide, but still very, very low. And this is indicating that, again, for mucus health. So what we do is kind of combine all this information, and from one test to the next, we're correlating all that information, and it is giving us better data. This one, then, you can see this is his inflammatory dysbiosis. We've got some very, very high numbers there. The Enterobacter, the Morganella, the Pseudomonas, those all cause an increase in lipopolysaccharides. The lipopolysaccharides are bacterial toxins that then enter the blood, and of course increases your risk of inflammatory disease process. Also, we've got histamine overgrowth, or high histamines is produced by the Citrobacter, the Klebsiella, and histamines. So we looked at his diet. Food high in histamines are aged cheeses, so cheddars, parmesans, processed meats, fermented foods, your sauerkrauts, your yogurts, alcohol, foods that are in vinegar, so pickles, canned meat like tuna and mackerel, raisins, apricots, which are the dried fruits, vegetables, this particularly says tomato and spinach, and then any soy products. Those will increase the histamine. And what does histamine do? It causes that allergic response. Okay. So if we've got eating foods high in histamines, that's also going to increase our risk of developing those sensitivities based on a high histamine production. Let's see, digestive insufficiency here. Again, this is indicating he has a high pH in his gut. A high pH, which means it's an alkalinic environment that disrupts the ability of this body to be able to kill off those normal bacteria. There are certain bacteria in your mouth and your upper digestive tract that should be killed by the pH in your stomach. When those bacteria are still making it through to your stool, that means there's insufficient acid along the way to kill off those bacteria. We looked at a possibility, or this indicates a possibility of H. pylori. How many of you heard of H. pylori? Okay. Again, it's a bacterial infection in the gut, often leads to reflux type symptoms. Can, of course, lead to cancers if it's not eradicated. Down here, the elastase, that even though it's on the low side of normal, that's an indication that his pancreas is correctly and isn't able to digest. Your pancreas makes amylase and lipase, which again help break down fats. And so that was a problem with him as well. Some of the histamine intolerant symptoms when we're talking about histamines is diarrhea, abdominal pain, bloating, sinus congestion, shortness of breath, low blood pressure, rapid heartbeat, fainting, itching of the skin, flushing, migraines, dizziness, anxiety, menstrual irregularities, swelling around the eyes, the lips, the throat, unexplained fatigue. So a lot of those things go along with that histamine response. Here, Spotlight 5, again, you can see all of the high numbers there. The Morganella and the Pseudomonas and the Citrobacter Klebsiella, those are actually activating the mast cells of the immune system. Those mast cells are like the fire alarms in your body that alert the body to invaders. They don't actually kill bacteria, but they alert the immune system that something's going on. They also lead to vasodilation, so your blood vessels get larger. tissues start to swell, your muscles in your GI tract as well as your airways start to constrict. And I'm sure most of you have heard of anaphylactic shock, where somebody has a high allergic response to something when their throat swells up. That's what's going on here. So could definitely be. Also, because we've got some indicators here, chronic inflammation and secretory IgA. Again, we talked about IgA as being that immunoglobulin. Fungus, this was a good note. He didn't have any fungal. But, and that's one of the good ones. I don't think we've had anybody so far. So far, we haven't had any fungal. So these then are the recommendations. And I'm not going to read them all to you by any means, but you can see phase 1, low histamine diet, reduce aged or fermented foods, alcohol, canned foods, leftovers is a big one. Leftovers, if you've got any leftovers, package them up, freeze them right away. And then when you're ready to eat them, get them out of the freezer and thaw them out. Less than 24 hours, they should be unfrozen because they will start to ferment. So that's a big one. Digestive support, histamine support. We were also doing immunoglobulin support. That was the first 2 weeks of this process. Okay. After he was feeling a little bit better, bowels were more normal, because we're getting rid of a lot of stuff here. Okay. Then for the phase 2 is the next 6 to 8 weeks. Again, continue the low histamine diet, the digestive support, the histamine support, oil of oregano or GI Microbex. Those are natural antibiotics that will help rid his body of some of the bacteria that are there. There are die-off symptoms, again, as that bacterial overgrowth is dying off. Again, H. pylori, if we suspected that, we would alter some of these supplements for him. Again, 8 weeks, and then phase 3 is another 8 to 12 weeks. May need to repeat phases 2 and 3, trial tapering off some of the histamine supports. Okay, then we did the metabolomics test. Metabolomics is a urine specimen. Same thing, you take a little kit home, you pee in a cup first thing in the morning, freeze it for at least 4 hours before you mail it in. Same system, you can see he doesn't have any greens here. Mediums, he's got a couple in that yellow range and one in the orange range. Okay. So as we're looking through here, the glucose indicator is high. And that is an indication of glucose or carb intolerance or insulin resistance, possibly kidney dysfunction, and possibly a magnesium insufficiency. As we look down here through these, this one, although it's technically still in the normal range, it's on the high end, so is this one. They're trending towards being high, and so this is indicating that he's having some problems with the ammonia. Ammonia is a byproduct of digestion of proteins. Okay. Again, as it says, 4 out of 7 of these indicators were trending upwards. So mitochondrial dysfunction. Mitochondria are little battery packs that help your cells run. High caloric intake, high carb intake, which was interesting because he was on a carnivore diet. So not a whole lot of, there was a lot of protein that he was taking in. This one, yeah, energy metabolism, ketones. So lactic acid is a byproduct. We talked about that one. Ketones here. Ketones is on the high end. When you've got ketones in your urine and glucose in your urine, that's an indication of possibly type 2 diabetes leading towards diabetic ketoacidosis. Those things should not be in your urine, but when we find them, we have to start thinking about type 2 diabetes. Okay, your B vitamins. So that's all coming in here too. Let's see. B vitamins looked relatively okay with the exception of this folate. No, it's here. It's here. Okay. Folate indicated a B9 deficiency. Maybe over supplementation because the B6 was so high, but also could be related to cell membrane damage. Central nervous system and neurotransmitters. So the tryptophan is in the process, it turns into serotonin, and serotonin then turns into melatonin. And what does melatonin do? It's your sleep hormone, okay? Serotonin is what hormone? Your feel-good hormone, okay? So with these numbers, the tryptophan being kind of right there in the middle, not really concerned about that one. Serotonin turnover levels were low with adequate tryptophan, so maybe just not enough tryptophan was getting into the cells. Let's see, catecholamines, very high. Those are precursors to your epinephrine. Epinephrine is your fight or flight, helps you deal with stress. And so that's an indication of chronic stress. And signs and symptoms of low epinephrine or low norepinephrine or fatigue, low energy, low blood pressure, difficulty responding to common stressors, difficulty focusing, and dizziness. Toxins. Let's see. So again, high levels here, high levels of DNA damage secondary to oxidative stress. Down here, we're looking at impaired ammonia detoxification from the liver, possible magnesium and manganese insufficiencies, and symptoms of hyperammonia, or respiratory alkalosis means usually respiratory alkalosis, the patient's hyperventilating, maybe some cerebral edema, nausea, vomiting, lethargy. So a lot of stuff going on. This one then, exposure to plastics is what this one indicates. Emissions, inks, flame retardant chemicals. Again, probably was having some exposure to toxins working in the automotive industry. Here we've got some highs also in intake of high sulfur rich foods. This is beer, wine, eggs, cruciferous vegetables, or nuts. Again, oxidative stress. And metabolic or digestive, and you can see again, she has these 3 circles. She also has a couple other underlined So amino acid insufficiencies, chronic inflammation, and gut dysbiosis. And that's all indicated by those numbers. So his summary, metabolic dysfunction, potential insulin resistance, potential gut dysbiosis, oxidative stress, dysbiosis, neurotoxic state, GI spotlight, which we did, and that was a priority that we'd already done anyway. Again, you can see diet, low glycemic diet, modified carb, low carb diet, and time restricted eating protocols. So he has made changes. He's made some awesome changes.
He has. We did all this, you can see, going back through all here, there's a lot. Right? It's easy to get lost in all this. And so when I look at these, this is what I want to know ultimately, right? Where are you scoring? And then what's the protocol for reversal? Right? This is the money maker here, right? To have it all laid out here, exactly what you need to take, exactly how long you need to take it. Like there's nothing else on the market like this. Like everything else I've ever taught is like, oh, these things are good for you. 90% of Americans don't get enough of this. You should take this just to cover your bases. That's in a way, it's a little bit lazy. It's so much better to know exactly what you're deficient in. For my dad, I didn't want to know what caused his stroke. I knew what caused his stroke. His blood pressure was high for so long. Well, I want to know what caused his blood pressure to be so high for so long. And so where did I go to? I went to energy metabolism. And I went to the gut. And we found so many things out. We saw, only his fungal levels were good. We saw a protocol that needed to be done. And he might need to do it for several years at a time to undo decades of damage that he had done over the years and years of his life. And so, yes, the one test gave us all this stuff, and the other test that gave us all of this stuff. And we had essentially two things that we should do. We found out, he was both insulin resistant and he was protein resistant. Now, what do you do there? Well, you have to rely on ketones and a ketogenic diet more than so that you're getting what you need. I wouldn't recommend that for everybody. It's good to be able to go in and out of ketosis, but yeah, that low carb diet, very, very essential. But also, he didn't just want to rely on proteins because he was having a bad response to protein too. We needed to fix his gut. He saw all the stuff with the overgrowth in his gut, and all those things cause that oxidative stress and oxidative damage in his cells. And so we had to do both of them together. And so, yes, one can tell you a lot. Two tells you way more. So I bought both of these for my dad. I just took it on the chin. Like, I need to know for my dad so he can help. And fortunately, just like anything else I've helped him with, he's like, yeah, let's do it. If you're going to help me find the root cause, that's what I want to do. So normal pricing on these, $375 for the GI Spotlight, just because it tells you more. There's a lot more that you can learn on that because the gut controls so much more. And then the metabolomic Spotlight, it's $250 for that. And it does tell you a lot in there, and especially if you're dealing with energy metabolism issue. And I would say, especially if you're concerned about cancers, because so much of that is energy metabolism going wrong in the cell, that's the test I would go with. So both of these are $25 off a piece tonight. But if you're in a spot where you've just been having symptoms for years and years and years and years, and nobody's ever been able to tell you root cause on this, then I would just go ahead and get both. And so what we're doing for both of those is we're lowering the price overall to just $4.99 if you want to get both of those tonight. And I'm doing that just for tonight, one, because I don't make money on that, and so I can't do that forever. But I also want to reward you guys who are showing up here with a discount like that so you can know the answers. You've been coming because you wanted to learn stuff. I want to reward that. And if you're getting that tonight, we're gonna take 20% off of any other supplements that you need. Now, granted, you may not want to buy supplements with this because it's about to tell you exactly what your recommendations are 2 weeks from now, but it can tell you a whole lot more there. And so that you guys can pre-order those tonight. I know we only have a couple in stock, but we'll get those for you. It's usually less than a week turnaround to get those back. And then it'll be about 2 weeks once you mail it in before we start getting those answers. we'll have Cheryl and I will sit down with Sarah, who's the microbiologist who looks at all the labs. And she kind of tells us what she's finding and what she's seen in the patterns of everything. And then we'll decide on a protocol. So you definitely want to pick those up tonight. But the key thing here is you can't deal without the 5 essentials. And so all these, like we can get you all the supplements in the world, but you still got to do the right stuff. So make sure that you're plugging in on each of these. So one of your takeaways tonight is pick something. I know I gave you a lot. It's like drinking from a fire hose, right? You just got blown away with all the information. I want you to pick 1, 2, or 3 things that stuck out to you. Whether that's sleep, whether that's getting adjusted, whether that's, exercising a little bit more, and do them. Dial in and do them tonight. Go home. If it's the spine, start doing your home exercises. If you need an exam, you need some x-rays, schedule that before you leave. We'll get that done for you. I'll give you home exercises to do for your spine so that you can start seeing improvements there. You need to exercise, go home and exercise. It's not too late. You might need to do a more low energy one, so that you can actually get to sleep. If it's sleep, let's start trying to get up with the sun. And guess what? If you're going too late to get up with the sun and get proper rest, you'll start going to bed earlier if you start getting up with the sun every single day. And so, just work on those things. Identify 1, 2, or 3 things that you can do. And then come back next month. Guess what we're doing next month? It's going to be recipe night. Holiday recipe night. We're going to do it the week before Thanksgiving. Guess who's making the turkey? Yep, I make the turkey every year. So we're going to have some recipes for you guys to pick out. We'll put that out here in the next couple of days. We're not going to do it quite yet because guess what's on Friday? And our 9th year anniversary. And so we're going to celebrate on Friday morning. All morning, we're going to have some goodies for you guys. We're going to have balloons out. We'll have giveaways and prizes. There'll be more discounts for you guys as well. So make sure you come back for that. You're still working on a women's wellness event, right? No, canceled it. Oh man, women can't do well this fall.
No, January just because.
January just.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so become and roll 1 to 3 improvements every single month. So that means coming back, getting 1 to 3 more, working on it and improving it. 4 Rs, that's a 2-month protocol. If you remember from last month, if you want the 4-hour gut reset protocol, you can also get that tonight for 20% off. Get to the next class and then bring people. I love seeing new faces here. I love seeing people that aren't involved in the office otherwise. You guys are always welcome. Keep coming back. So I know I said I would save questions to the end. Did anybody have any questions for me? Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes. Go back to the protocol there. So yeah, there's a lot here. So this is the short one. This is kind of on the side. We actually decided to delay some of this because so much of it was related to that. Going back here. Yeah. So I mean, Cheryl read through this pretty in depth here. But basically, the first 2 weeks, that was to get his histamine levels under control. He was basically having an allergic response. And his big one, because he had been eating a carnivore diet, was he was eating eggs every single day, multiple times a day. As part of that, they had chickens out back. It was super easy. And so eggs are one of those foods that creates a histamine response. He also loved cheese. He was doing a lot of pork rinds. That was his one processed food that he was doing that fits within carnivore. Not a healthy choice for anybody. And so we had to cut out a lot of those things, getting the histamine diet there, support, while also supporting that gut lining as well. That was the key of the first 2 weeks. Then we moved him into that 6 to 8 week. This was more the remove and kill off the bad guys that had grown inside of his gut. And so he did this for about 2 months, and then he's currently on phase 3. And phase 3 is a rebuilding phase. And so if we go back to last month, it's the 4-hour gut reset protocol. His has a little bit more histamine and some of the other things going on because we did have to control at the same time affected blood glucose and urinary glucose. But it was really, this was just prepping, getting that histamine. But here it's the remove, and then this was repair, restore, and replenish. And that's what we're doing. So he's probably about to go back here because blood pressure hasn't come down yet. We'll probably go back to phase 2 here as we wrap up phase 3 the first time around, and we'll repeat that. Now, at some point, you might say, I just want to know what my levels are, but have I made any improvement? Because especially if blood pressure doesn't start coming down, that's an end game symptom. But at the root cause, yeah, retest. You don't always just have to keep repeating over and over. But I'll probably encourage you to just go through this again. And then after the second time through, if we're not seeing the numbers move on his blood pressure, then we'll go back and we'll retest just to see what we need to dial into still on that. And maybe that we need to move from that protocol more towards some of the things that we're doing on the second protocol, spotlight, where it's really focusing on that the blood sugar and the energy that was in that insulin resistance valve, where this is less of a timeline thing. The timeline was given to us in the GI spotlight because it was at the root of some of this stuff going on.
So we have done this on a 10-year-old. Doctor said, well, let's take his gallbladder out. So they did because mom and dad didn't know any better, and that's what they were told. And that didn't help. Severe allergic response to histamines. And he is improving with this protocol. Another lady, we did the GI spotlight on her, and it did show gluten intolerance and dairy. Within about a week after her cutting that out, before I even had the supplements, she was already feeling better just by getting rid of the dairy. And she's feeling even better. I saw her today. Still feeling better. Every time I see her, she said, it's a miracle. So that's really good to hear.
Yeah.
So,
And her specific, she was dealing with a lot of dizziness, and she wasn't sure where it was coming from. We were adjusting her 2 times a week. It wasn't affecting the dizziness, but the second that we knew that gluten and dairy and we cut those things out, it was like literally the next day she said, I went bowling and I scored a 150. Like normally I only do 120. I did 150. I'm like, that's awesome. I was like, why? And she's like, well, because I wasn't dizzy anymore. I cut out the gluten, I cut out the dairy. So just knowing that, to be able to tell somebody that can make all the difference. That's not usually a diet I give to somebody that's, in their late 70s. That's something I tell, moms of kids that are dealing with, digestive or skin issues.
just so I understand. Is it a blood draw?
No, so the GI spotlight, the stool sample for that. So you put in a cup and then we mail that in. The metabolomics test is the urine test. So you pee in a cup and then freeze that. So yeah, no blood, but yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions?
Which one would you recommend if you were maybe lower protein?
Low protein, I would look at the metabolomics because that's going to look at energy metabolism. Anytime you're looking at, how you're converting stuff, that's going to be the better one because that's literally looking at energy transfers and efficiencies. Now you might get in there and find that yes, it's off, and then you need to go back and do this test. But it's the cheaper test, and it does look specifically for that. That will tell us that you're not absorbing it well. It just might not tell us why you're not. So they work really well hand in hand. I mean, we have a third test available called the genomics test. Cheryl and I haven't even gotten to it yet, just because this is so much. Like there's so little that can be explained by the genetics. There are a few things, but these two, 99% of stuff is both of these tests. So it's possible that you'll get one. You're like, actually, I also need the other one too. And so that's part of the reason why it's $4.99 instead of $5.25. Do my math again. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah.
member to
Yeah.
negative or positive.
Yeah.
I don't know really what.
Yeah, so some of those tests are a little different. I've had some experience with some of them. Some of them have no scientific
You don't know.
backing at all. It's just like, Yeah. so the colonoscopy will literally see if there's anything. Really, they're looking for polyps or damage to the lining of the gastrointestinal tract. The thing that I'm not a fan of with the colonoscopy is that I don't know the rates specifically, but every so often they perforate.
Mm.
And that's just, I mean, there's easier ways to look at how healthy the colon is, like just poop in a cup, right? You know, the only struggle is we can't get the poop in the cup version covered by insurance, where they'll stick a tube up your butt all day and cover that so long as you met your deductible. So, like, you know, our pledge coming out of doctor's school is first do no harm. And yeah, we're doing these things with all sorts of side effects. Like, yeah, let's do the least harmful thing that gives us the most information too. So that would be more. So I'm not telling anybody not to get a colonoscopy. You know, it's a good idea occasionally. Certain cases where I would do it. That's not something I'm going to sign up for every year or every 5 years. I'm going to do these, and then if there's still issues, then you go at it. Any other questions, comments? Okay, well, don't forget to restock tonight. Everything else is 15% off, so if you need anything, make sure you stock up. And if Cheryl didn't punch your card, make sure you get a card punch for showing up. And if you need to spin the wheel, we've also got the wheel out. Every 5 times you get punches on the card, you're gonna get a free prize. So, thanks for coming, guys.
Oh, the prizes.
Oh, prizes, almost forgot about that. All right, who wants to win stuff?